Welcome to the Ascension Podcast with Paul James Caden. In this podcast, we will discuss philosophy and spirituality from the Urantia book, living a peaceful, balanced life, spirituality and many other topics that relate to the growth and evolution of your soul. And now here is your host, Paul James Caden.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ascension Podcast, formerly Zen Spirit. I'm your host, Paul James Caden, and I wanted to make a quick mention in the beginning of this show that when I recorded the first episode of Zen Spirit, the episode entitled "Have Yourself a Zen Christmas," I really wanted to get a podcast out for the holiday season. I didn't want to do it under the spirit side. I wasn't really settled on a podcast name at that moment, but I was really into my Zen and mindfulness. I mean, I still am. That's a part of my personal spiritual path. So I thought Zen Spirit, that sounds good. Maybe it'll stick. Maybe it'll be indefinite, but we'll see. And I think I made mention of that in the first show, but I can't swear to it. Because the amazing thing is I hadn't done a podcast in 2 or 3 months before then. And it's incredible what you forget, how to do it, when you haven't done it for a while. And those first 2 shows with Zen Spirit, my gosh, I had so many interruptions from family members. And when I have to pause the podcast and then I come back to it, I usually jot down where I left off speaking, because if I don't, I totally forget. And so I may or may not have mentioned it in that show. I don't remember. I didn't go back and listen to that particular show afterwards like I usually do. I just wanted to get it out. But at any rate, I wanted to make some changes to the podcast. I wanted to settle on something that's a little more meat and potatoes, where I am in my particular spiritual journey, and also something I think we all need. And I think what we need is practical spirituality, common sense, something that focuses on the growth and evolution of our own souls, and not so worried about all this political and conspiratorial, melee that's going on in the world right now under the guise of religion. It seems, unfortunately, that organized religion has really led a lot of people down a rabbit hole that they may never recover from. And it's a sad thing, because I saw this coming back in the 90s when I was eyeball deep in the evangelical Christianity movement, and I started to see some things that were a little too political, a little too controlling over the congregations and the adherents. And I remember telling many family and friends that this doesn't look good, and if they continue with this current trend, who knows what's going to happen in the future. But it looks like it could be very confusing to a lot of people, and it sure has proven to be just that, along with a lot of other organized religions out there. And that's why I wanted to talk about in this first episode of the Ascension Podcast. Or, rather, we're asking the question in this podcast: will the real God please stand up? Because we certainly have a lot of versions of God out there. We have for a long time, but now it's really at a fever pitch with everybody's version of God. Some say he's love, some say he's angry, he's wrathful, he's a man of war, he's very immersed in the politics and political outcomes of, our country, our world, even though Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." We somehow, have the, here in America, the Republican version of God and the Democratic version of God. And, not to mention all the different religions and, denominations. Which one is correct? Will the real God please stand up? And as that has been the habit when I began with Zen Spirit podcast, um, which this show, uh, it's going to still talk about having that peaceful and balanced life, and it's still going to have the basic elements of what I started out with Zen Spirit. And one of the traditions I want to stay with is having a quote at the beginning of each podcast, getting into the discussion. And today's quote is coming from the Urantia book. And if you don't know what that is, this isn't a show where I really want to jump off into that topic, but I'm going to have a very special guest on next week's show. And we're going to talk about what is the Urantia book and why we feel it's important to, an individual's spiritual journey. So if you're not quite sure what the Urantia book is, you can look it up online, but there's a lot of misinformation, even by people who've written books about it, don't really understand what it is. And we're going to talk about all of that next week and fill in a lot of gaps. But suffice to say, our quote of the week for today's show comes from the Urantia book, and it is from paper number 1, section 6, verse 6. And it reads, "You can argue over opinions about God, but experience with Him and in Him exists above all human controversy and mere intellectual logic." Let's read that again. You can argue over opinions about God, but experience with Him and in Him exists above all human controversy and mere intellectual logic. And I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that is one of many verses in the Urantia book that really resonates with me. And I've had people ask me in the past when I've talked about the Urantia book on my show, when I had the spirit side, and they would say, well, why would you want to read that? That is, the devil's gospel. It contradicts the Bible in parts. And, this is, written by the minions of Satan and all that type of thing. Well, I really don't think so. And again, this is something that, we'll probably get into a bit more next week. But I came across the Urantia book probably in the mid 90s. Some of you that have listened to my show, for a while may have heard this story. I found it at a Barnes and Noble bookstore. And I didn't know what it was. I never bought it. I thought if this is something written by some crazy cult, I don't want to buy it. But it was this big book with a blue cover. And I used to pick it up every week and just read through it. And there were so many little things in there that resonated with me, that just hit my soul and my mind, that made me go, yeah, that's what I've always felt. That's what I've always thought ever since I was, a little kid. Because since I was very young, I had the sense of another world, something or someone that's very loving, that is around us and watching over us and taking care of us and guiding us in our lives, that, this life isn't the be all and end all. And as I got older, I had my ideas and my thoughts, and then my parents got involved with religion. And of course, then I was told, well, all the stuff you think about God, or that you felt or thought you felt, that could have been the devil, because it doesn't agree with our doctrines, so you have to get rid of that. And that scared the bejesus out of me. And of course, like a lot of people, I went against my own natural intuitions, inclinations, and inner feelings about God and just went with, the religious doctrines. But there's a lot of things in the Urantia book that I remember thinking about when I was very young, and I never read them in any other book. I never heard anybody talk about these things until, I read this particular book, and I didn't actually end up buying the Urantia book until, somewhere 2014, 2015, so, 5, 6 years ago. And there's a lot in there that resonates, and this being one of them, because that's one of the things, just for me, and I'm not the only one. There's a lot of other people, when you talk to them, they have a very similar story. And they say, gee, I remember being just a little kid, 3, 4, 5 years old, and looking at the sky and feeling like this world wasn't my real home. I remember talking to God, talking to angels before I even knew what God and angels were, just talking to this presence around me and, believing there was something beyond this world, and it was very loving and it guided me and I felt so comforted and peaceful. And then, at some point in life came religion and said, oh no, that's of the devil. And, for me, when the Urantia book in this verse is talking about that there's nothing that can replace those personal experiences with and in God, that is something that I know in my heart, I feel in my heart. I've known it all my life. A lot of other people, as I said, have had that same experience. And it's easy for somebody to come along and say, oh, well, that was the devil. That was some evil entity deceiving you about God, tricking you so you would never gain salvation the right way. But now, as an older adult that is, I've traveled more than a few miles with religion and studying the religions of the world and many of the sects and movements that are out there. It's very easy for them to come along and say, oh, no, you have to do it our way. But my argument would be, what kind of a God would allow a little innocent child who somehow has this inkling of something greater, something bigger, finds it to be loving? And in turn, I remember myself as a little child, watching, when my brother would act up, or, grown-ups would argue and fight, or, my father would drink too much and argue with my mother. I remember being a little kid, 3, 4 years old, looking at this going, well, this isn't right. This isn't how we're supposed to act. We're supposed to love one another. We're supposed to respect one another. We're supposed to be kind to one another. So, A, is that something that the devil would inspire a child to do? And B, what kind of God would allow, Satan, the devil, to come in and deceive a little child that way and do nothing about it? If Satan can so easily appear as an angel of light, as many always claim with everything that's outside of their doctrine, then why doesn't God just as easily appear and say, you've been deceived, no, this is the way it is? Why would we be left so hung out to dry in this universe of deception? Because that's one thing I've never agreed with. Everybody is always the devil, the devil, the devil, those who follow the devil, the baby-eating, blood-drinking, leftist Democrats and, in Hollywood and this, all these things we hear about, today and in the past, all the things the devil was doing through movies and rock music, and, he's everywhere. He's appearing to people, as an angel of light. He's giving them all these fake spiritual experiences that are leading them down the wrong path, these New Agers and all this type of thing. So if the devil's doing all these things, why isn't God making himself known? Why would he stay so hidden, just saying, okay, I'm just going to sit here and wait for, some preacher to come along and put you on the right path, but I'm not going to, I'm really not going to do anything to help that person out who is deceived at the ripe old age of 3 or 5. That just doesn't make any sense. That to me is giving more power to something dark than the God of love who made all things in the universe and beyond. And I just don't think that is so. And it also makes me think, these experiences, if you really do the research into this topic, you will find that there's the beginning of life and then there's the end of life, birth and death. They're like the two bookends of every life. And at the beginning of life, birth, if you really research this out, you'll find that there's so many people at an early age that had this concept of God or something bigger in their lives. And they felt protected, they felt guided, they felt like someone was watching over them. They knew that this world wasn't their home. But then later religion comes along and says, well, no. That's the devil. You need to forget all of that and connect with God the way we tell you that you should. And then we have the end of life, death. And if we look into the near-death experience, we find all of these accounts of people from ancient times having the same experience. Seeing deceased loved ones, seeing angels, seeing this beautiful land like they're looking through a doorway saying, it's so beautiful over there. Oh, there's my mother, there's my father. There's angels or, the spirit guardians, whatever they called them, in their ancient lands years ago. They always have this feeling, and some of them say, I'm going home, and then they pass away. But then religion steps in again and says, well, that's from the devil. But see, I would say, when we're talking about personal experience, who is anyone to come along at the beginning of life when someone who's very young has this knowing of something greater? And it's so innocent and it's so pure and it's so loving and it brings so much comfort and joy into your life. I know it did me and the other people that I've talked to that had similar experience. Who's anybody to come along and say, well, that experience is wrong? You have to disown all of that and embrace what I'm telling you. And then the experience at the end of life step in and say, well, that's wrong, that's evil, that's something else. You need to forget all that and believe and follow what I'm telling you. And so in between those two bookends of life, birth and death, life is filled with experiences. And we face that same thing with a lot of religious folks, unfortunately. And I'm not picking on anybody here, but it seems like they're always trying to knock people off of the road, for lack of a better term. Somebody can have an experience with God. I had this dream and, Jesus spoke to me and he told me. Well, how do you know that was Jesus? Well, that could have been a demon. That could have been Satan masquerading as an angel of light. That could have been Satan masquerading as another Jesus. What did he tell you? And they'll pick apart things, and if they find one little hair width thing that doesn't agree with their doctrine, I think that was a satanic dream. I wouldn't listen to that. Then you'll have people that will say, gee, I was having a real hard time, or a family member was ill, and I woke in the middle of the night, and, here was this brilliant angel standing at the foot of my bed, and I just felt such peace. And I knew at that moment what I had to do, or I knew my family member was going to be all right. And then here come the people. Well, how do you know that wasn't a demon? How do you know that was really an angel? You need to be really careful with that kind of thing, because Satan, he can heal too. That angel appeared, and your son, your mother, your daughter, your father, whoever got better. Well, that could have been a trick, to get you into angel worship, because now you're having more of an interest in angels, and you're not supposed to do that. So I think that was satanic. I think that was demonic. So we have all these experiences in our lives of God guiding us, revealing himself to us, showing his love and his closeness and his concern for us. And we have all these other people saying, well, no, you can't accept that experience. You have to deny your experience. It doesn't matter how wonderful it was, how good it made you feel, how close to God it made you feel, how close to Jesus it made you feel. If it does not conform to our doctrine, then your experience is null and void. And you can pretty much put anything in between those two bookends of birth and death, even reading something like the Urantia book. And there's many people who find the Urantia book and they read it and they say they just weep, because there's so many things that resonate with them in the Urantia book that they say they knew it since they were children. They knew it in their heart. They knew it in their soul. And it just filled them with such a joy and such a relief that they would weep and say, finally, something that confirms the truth that's in my own heart. And people will come along and say, well, you shouldn't read that book because that is from the devil. And so all of those joyful experiences that move a person closer to God, closer to Christ, are always null and void. We try to cancel them out, or other people try to cancel them out with their version of God. And some people might ask, well, the Urantia book, well, what about the Bible? The Bible's fine. I read the Bible. I consider myself to be a Christian just because I practice mindfulness and meditation, and I'm interested in the Zen life and some of the teachings of Buddhism. Just because I read the Urantia book, that doesn't mean I'm something else. It means I'm Paul James Caden, and I have my spiritual path. And of course, I read the Bible. Of course, I pray. And many people that read the Urantia book, many of them look at those two books as the pillar of their faith, the Urantia book and the Bible, that they're both important. So it's, again, the individual experience. Just because I or someone else reads the Urantia book or some Buddhist material, it doesn't make the Bible null and void. It doesn't make Jesus null and void. The Urantia book is very centered on the teachings and the life of Jesus. So, we need to stop trying to destroy the personal experiences of other people with our opinions and our doctrines. How would it feel if someone approached you and said, well, your version of God is wrong. You're worshiping, the devil. I mean, there are some people that practice Judaism that will tell a Christian that, well, you're into idolatry. You worship Jesus. There's only one God. You have no part with God. Well, how does that make you feel? We have to leave other people's experiences alone. And right on the other hand, I think we need to look at personal experience versus religion. Now, personal experience, and again, the Urantia book, something I agree with. And I think if we turn through the pages of the Bible, we'll find the same message. We have to have the foundation to understand that personal experience is not going to lead us into fanaticism. It's not going to lead us into bizarre versions of mysticism. It's not going to give us the prophet complex where we sit back and say, oh, I had this vision, I had this dream, I had this experience. So now, I'm going to be some great teacher and everybody else is in error and I see where they're all wrong because I had this experience and they didn't. Personal experience is never going to lead us into being a fearmonger or browbeating other people, pointing fingers at them because we had an experience and they didn't. If we venture into any of those territories, we are venturing into the realms of error and fanaticism. And the Urantia book is very clear on that, which I very much agree with and appreciate. Personal experience should do two very simple things, and that is to draw us closer to God and to increase our faith in God. And we could add a third one to that to say it makes us love our fellow man more because we have a clearer view, a clearer picture of what life is really all about, what the ultimate end goal is, and that is to be with God when we leave this earth. And now, personal experience does have its pitfalls because there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people that have, start these crazy cults and religions and movements. So it definitely has its pitfalls. And we have to be careful. But right over on the other hand, if we look at religion, organized religion and its doctrines, right from the very beginning with the Church of Rome, they got involved in politics, they fought wars, they tortured people. They were violent. And these are things, we can look in the very pages of the Bible, right in the Gospels, where Jesus said, his kingdom is not of this world. He who lives by the sword will die by the sword. Jesus and his apostles did not have any political affiliation. They did not fight wars. They would just as soon lay down their lives and be fed to the lions and be tortured and killed before they would pick up the sword and go to war and torture or kill somebody else to convert them. That's not what they did. But right from the get-go, big organized religion entered into the political arena. They tortured and killed those who wouldn't adhere to their version of the faith. They fought in wars. They had their own army. And we haven't progressed very far in religion since then because we still do the same things. Look at the state of America because of politics. There are Christians out there who want to assassinate politicians. There's Christians who want to assassinate, Dr. Fauci, whether you like the guy or not. But that's pretty bad. People look back at January 6th of 2020 and say, oh, there was no insurrection there. Oh, that was very peaceful. Yeah, we had a bunch of people carrying crosses and waving Jesus flags, and right in the middle of it all was a gallows erected to hang Mike Pence because he wouldn't stop the counting of the votes, for the election. I mean, we haven't. And I know some people are going to jump on that and leave comments, but, don't bother because that's not what this podcast is about. These are examples to show where we haven't progressed very much in big organized religion since its inception. It's really gotten away from the simple message of Christ. And now most Christians, sadly, and this is very heartbreaking to see, most Christians for decades now focus more on the devil, focus more on politics, and now focus more on conspiracy theories mixed with religion and prophecy. And even though those prophecies fail again and again and again, they won't pull themselves away from it. Rather than focusing on the simple message, faith in Christ, faith in God, living the teachings of the Master, Jesus, and emulating his life when he walked on the earth, and those of his early followers who were peaceful, loving, nonviolent people. They were not political. Yes, they talked about prophecy. Yes, they believed the end was going to come, that day when the end of the age, all things will be made new. And even the Urantia book talks about that time of entering into the time of life and light. So that day will come, and I personally believe myself that it will come. But they didn't go out there and scare people and say, oh, if we don't vote for this person, we're going to be left in the rapture. Oh, if we associate with that group of Christians because they believe in something different, or they don't hold our political views, or whatever the case may be, oh, we're going to be out. They didn't get into all this stuff we see today. And we just have all of these denominations and Christian sects, and Christianity isn't the only one. I mean, you look at other religions who want to dominate the world, who want to go to war, who want to conquer the nations and make them submit to their version of God. There are some in Islam who want to do this. There's some in Judaism, unfortunately, who want to do the same thing. And now there are Christians who want to do the same thing. And yet they point the fingers at the other ones and say, oh, you bad people. Oh, you terrorists. Oh, you antichrists. So suffice it to say, it's not really personal experience, people's personal experience with and in God that has caused, so much toxicity in the world. It's our man-made, man-constructed religions that say, follow us, follow what we tell you to do. because even inside of religion, there's a lot of people that say they've had enough of religion, they've gotten away from it all, but they take all those doctrines and beliefs with them. They're still concentrating every day on, the devil, the bad guys, the conspiracy theories mixed with prophecy and religion. How everybody who doesn't believe like they believe, are bad people. People that don't vote like they vote are bad people, and they're the enemy. So they still carry that toxic germ of division with them, and they'll say, "Oh no, this, I'm not involved with a religion anymore. I have my personal relationship. I do my own thing with God, but it's the same as the group they came out of, and maybe even worse, because now there's so many sects out there and crazy groups, and they're very easy to find on the internet. I've talked about this in my other shows, ad nauseum. Sometimes it's very easy to find an even more fanatical group to join and start adhering to their doctrines and beliefs. And then people fool themselves and say, well, no, they're just like-minded others like I am. Well, with some things, yes, with some things, no, but we just want to be surrounded with that group mentality. And so I think we wouldn't have a whole lot of this going on if we were all born into this world, had our positive, loving, peaceful experiences with God and in God, grew up in those experiences, and then took them into the world as we got older, loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. And that's one of the big messages of the Urantia book, again, that I agree with. We're not to force our religion on other people, but going out and doing good as we experience God, as we love God more. We become better people. And because we become better people, because our love and our faith in God has grown, we grow at the soul level, the spiritual level, and then we go out into the world and we do good as Jesus did good. We minister to others, we help others. We're a positive influence in the world and in people's lives rather than a negative influence. And that's the city on the hill, or the lamp that's lit and sit on a stand where everyone can see its light. If there were enough people doing that, being a positive influence and having peace in their lives, there might be more people that would eventually say, hey, I want that. I'm tired of living in the rat race. I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of being, in these religions that just, it's war and it's politics and it's fighting and it's division and it's hatred and it's, whatever craziness comes down the pike. And I've known people that have come out of those things and they say, my God, it was so exhausting every day. It just spiritually and emotionally was burning me out, and I didn't even realize it. And all of this is going to hit a wall eventually. That's my prophecy. That's my guarantee. This will all eventually hit a wall, and somebody has to be there to pick up the pieces. And it's going to be the people that just had their peaceful, loving, growth-inspiring experiences with and in God. And just let His presence, let His love, let their faith in Him grow who they are. These are going to be the spiritual doctors and nurses that, bandage everybody's spiritual wounds, picks them up, off the ground and shows them the right way, the loving way to go. But why wait till we hit that wall? Why wait? We can have those experiences now, and it doesn't mean you're not a Christian. It doesn't, you're not forsaking anything to have those loving experiences with God. But you're certainly forsaking the doctrines of men and their rules and especially if those doctrines and rules and ideas are hateful or divisive or packed with fear. Look what they're doing. Oh, the end is coming. Oh, the baby-eating politicians, who practice witchcraft and Satanism and vampirism or whatever. All these ideas. It's all of that fear, all of those toxic ideas. That's what you're getting rid of. And I'll tell you, once you step out of all that and you have that experience of God where you really experience His love and His peace in your life, you will never go back to that other stuff. You will never be talked out of it. You will never, you'll sit there and ask yourself, why didn't I do this sooner? What was I doing with all of that other, crazy religion? What the heck was I doing? Because it's so refreshing. And like I said, it doesn't mean you're not a Christian because you don't belong to some group or you're not following some church or some, knucklehead on the internet, or, or whatever, or clamoring around some politician that everybody else is hailing as, the new savior or whatever the case may be. It doesn't mean you're not a Christian just because you're not doing those things. Pray, read your Bible, take communion. Explore other things with reason. Read the Urantia book. It's not going to tell you to do anything crazy or new age. It's actually very down-to-earth advice about how to practice your faith and do most of the work that you do inside of yourself. And then once you grow, you bring those fruits of the Spirit into the world around you. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That is biblical. So let's stop trying to destroy other people's personal experience, but rather let's just give them guidance. If we see them getting into fanaticism or something weird, of course, then you have to put the brakes on and say, hey, this isn't what personal experience with God is all about. Remember the words of Jesus, by their fruits you shall know them. Look at all of the other people that had similar or same crazy ideas, and look where it got them. Either in jail, mass suicide with some, crazy group, Messiah complex. Look where it got the people before you that had similar ideas. That's not where you want to go. You don't want to, walk in the long road, in the hall of madmen. That's not what personal experience is all about. It's about growing your faith in your relationship with God, your love for God, making you a better person. Not a prophet, not some powerful holy man, that, starting a cult, that if all the women in the cult have sex with you, they'll be magically healed and brides of God, or some crazy nonsense like this. That's not what it's about. So, of course, we have to give people, some guidance on that path. We're all growing up spiritually. There are times we're all going to make mistakes, but we should be helping one another, not criticizing, not beating one another down, not getting people to conform or convert to our ideas. Because isn't it the truth, even if we get them to convert to our ideas and our doctrines, if they're going to, spiral into something um, unhealthy, or crazy, they're going to do it anyway. They'll take whatever spiritual seed you give them, and take, plant it in the soil of Crazy Town. So, personal guidance and helping our brothers and sisters is what is needed, not converting them. Well, they're converted, they're okay, so I can just leave them alone then. That can be very dangerous. We have to guide and help others. So we have to think, do we want personal experiences, with God and in God that grow our soul, grow our faith, grow our love for God, our love for Christ, our love for one another? Or do we want to trade it all in for religious doctrines and get involved in all the worldly things, the wars and the politics and, whatever it is, that the religious masses are pushing, this year, the flavor of the day, the flavor of, the year, whatever that might be. We've got to get away from the madness and stop running with the herd. And, these are usually people that call everybody else sheep, but they run in every direction, that their leaders point in. They never stop and think for themselves. They never stop and experience God for themselves. They're always saying, I wouldn't have known God. I wouldn't have known anything. I wouldn't have grown spiritually if it weren't for Pastor so-and-so, if it weren't for brother so-and-so, if it weren't for, this guy on the internet. No, these people are not your doorway to God. Your doorway to God is in your own soul. It's in your heart. That is where Christ knocks and says, if anyone answers, I and the Father will come in and make our home with him. Nobody else can give you God. You have to find and experience God for yourself. So in closing, let's read that particular quote from the Urantia book one more time. Paper 1, Section 6, Verse 6. You can argue over opinions about God, but experience with him and in him exists above all human controversy and mere intellectual logic. And it is my hope and my prayer that everybody who listens to this podcast will begin to experience God for themselves. That love and peace that just surpasses all understanding and takes your soul and your mind and your thinking and your life to a place that, you just can't describe it. And don't let anybody ever take that away from you once you have that experience. Because there is where you have found God. That is where you have found Christ. So everyone out there, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope you got something from this podcast this week. I will see you again next week. And remember, I have a very special guest. We're going to talk more about the Urantia book, fill in what it is not, and why we feel it's important for our individual spiritual journey. So until next time, stay in the light, stay in love, and thanks for listening.